And that led you to where the chemical had come from?
Yes, so we were looking at the phone calls of this, and we noticed they were communicating with people we identified as FSB officers, the Russian Domestic Intelligence Services. And it soon became clear that there was a group of these FSB officers who were in contact with each other and traveling. We got their travel records, and they were shadowing. So the idea that Putin wouldn't know this was happening, especially when this started happening after Navalny said he would be running for president, is completely unbelievable. He must know what was going on with this group.
And I mean, people will remember Alexei was put into a medically induced coma, and one of the big worries, of course, was that no one was quite sure what he'd been poisoning with. So that's why you tugged at that thread first. The key to unlock everything else.
Yeah, because the reports from the German media and other analysis of the chemicals used and items that were recovered from his hotel room showed the presence of Novichok. So we assumed that there wouldn't be half a dozen secret Novichok labs working independently. There must be kind of one structure. So it's really kind of exploring those structures inside Russia that allow us to make these connections and led us to this kind of new revelation.
It's odd, isn't it, that you and I are talking the day after we discovered that John le Carré had passed away, because it's impossible not to think of him as one reads some of the descriptions of what you and your colleagues have undertaken. So Alexei Alexandrov, one of the agents, turned his phone on very briefly, rather than using a burner phone, which would be more typical for Kremlin spies. And with that moment of switching it on and off, you identified or demonstrated that he was about a mile away, just as Navalny was sipping the poisoned drink.
Yeah, so basically he turned his phone on, and he must have turned it off immediately. He probably turned it off by mistake.
Yes.
He transferred 1 byte of data to the local cell phone tower, which is on the records, and we could establish it from there. And what's interesting as well is there's all these patterns that are used by these intelligence officers, both the GRU and the FSB. For example, we discovered that these FSB officers, on their fake identities, they had a date of birth that was exactly a year before their real date of birth. But they use the same pattern again and again and again, which allows us then, with the access to all these databases, to start, we find someone suspicious, and then we kind of apply these formulas. We look for people with the same first name but born exactly a year earlier. And because we know these kind of patterns of behavior, it helps us identify more and more people kind of more and more rapidly as well, which is very important.
How did Mr. Navalny greet the news that you had tracked down the people that tried to kill him?
I mean, one thing he said is he thought this would be something he would find out in, years or decades' time, but to find it out just a few months after it had happened, and in such detail. And we worked with his investigation team and also with CNN and Spiegel and other partners to review all our data as well, because we obviously don't want to publish something that is wrong. So everyone went through the data we have, double checked everything, did work to verify what they could, and he was absolutely astounded. He actually produced an hour-long video on his YouTube channel, which is kind of his main media outlet, because the Russian media tries to ignore him as much as possible, where he's out of the whole thing. It's about an hour long. It's already got I think 6 million views. So it gives you how much interest there is in Russia in this case, in this story.
And he said, I know who wanted to kill me, I know where they live, I know where they work, I know their real names, I know their false names, I have their photographs. Again, it's your matter-of-factness that I always find.
Every fucking day. Malta is the size of the Isle of Wight, and dab fails all the time. Dear, oh dear, oh dear.
Their jobs, and
yes,
we won't find that. But like we found with the GRU and the Skripal assassins and this Unit 295, which runs these assassination programs in Europe, they just use this. They make the same mistakes again and again. They use the same pattern of behavior, and because Russia collects so much information on their citizens and it's all corrupt, it leaves their entire basic intelligence operations while anyone who can piece it together.
We're just losing the phone line, ironically enough. But Elliot, the work you do, as you know, I am She's permanently agog with both admiration and a sort of Luddite befuddlement. But there's no mistaking these headlines. Special Kremlin hit squad tailed Navalny for years, and it is down to the work of Bellingcat, as Elliot mentioned, in association with Der Spiegel magazine in Germany and CNN. Thank you so much, as always, Elliot, for your time. We will talk again. In fact, last time I saw Elliot face to face, we were sitting at a table at a London event, the Magnitsky Awards that Bill Browder, my friend who I've introduced you to many times, organises every year. We had to do it virtually this year, and one of the other guests there had twice been poisoned. It's slightly unnerving to get that close to events, but for Bellingcat to do this is just breathtaking. British journalism at its absolute finest. Incredible to witness, and I'd urge you to go and find out more about that story now. We're almost a bit of relief, really, from the diet of domestic news that we're currently consuming, because that is an almost unprecedented skipfire, it would seem. That schools up and down the country have quietly closed their doors. The London Borough of Greenwich, by dint of having publicised the fact that they were poised to close their doors, have been on the receiving end of legal threats from the Secretary of State for Education, who I am beginning to conclude, not just suspect, didn't realise how many schools were shut up and down these islands.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at midday. The government is under growing pressure to rethink plans to ease coronavirus restrictions over Christmas, with scientists calling it a rash decision. Up to 3 households will be allowed to form festive bubbles from next Wednesday, despite soaring numbers of COVID cases in some areas. But a joint editorial in 2 health journals has warned the NHS could be overwhelmed as a result. Professor Devi Sridhar, a public health expert from the University of Edinburgh, says relaxing the restrictions will have consequences.
If we look at the Netherlands, Germany, Belgium, they're going into quite strict measures over the holiday period. There is increasingly an outlook for those several days, especially given the high number of cases we're currently having.
The leader of Greenwich Council has said he has no choice but to ask schools to remain open, following threats of legal action from the government. The local authority has agreed to withdraw its advice to schools in the South East London Borough to move to online learning.
Health and Safety at Work Act.
Amid
The schools
rising
can
COVID-19
close.
rates in the capital. The Education
Regardless
Secretary
what
Gavin Williamson
government
says
says.
keeping schools open should be a national priority. And Ofsted's Chief Inspector Amanda Spielman says each lost day is crucial at the moment.
With the amount that children have missed and the limitations on school events, plays, parties that make a lot of the normal sort of Christmas stuff undoable, I think a lot of schools have been very focused on teaching right up to the end of term to make the very most of the opportunity.
A 13-year-old has been arrested on suspicion of murder after the death of a boy aged 12. The body of Robert Buncis was found in Fishtoft near Boston on Saturday. Another teenager who's 14 has been charged with murder. England footballer Jack Grealish has been banned from driving for 9 months after a crash during the UK's first lockdown. The 25-year-old Aston Villa captain has also been ordered to pay almost £83,000 in fines and costs following the collision in Solihull. He previously admitted 2 charges of careless driving. The travel company Love Holidays has agreed to pay out more than £18 million to 44,000 customers who had their trips cancelled due to the pandemic. It follows an investigation by the Competition and Markets Authority, which received hundreds of complaints about the company's refund policy. The CMA says it can take the online travel agent to court if it fails to repay what's owed. In the city, a short time ago, the FTSE 100 was trading down 17 points at 65.14. The pound buys €1.09 and $1.33.
LBC weather.
With Halls, get winter ready.
A mixture of sunny spells and blustery showers. Some of the showers in southern and western areas will be heavy. Breezy but mild again, with a high of 11 degrees. From Global's newsroom, I'm Holly Harris.
After this year,
Holly
Tesco says
Harris
there is no
headlines.
naughty list, so everyone deserves a great Christmas. Which is why you should tuck into one of our succulent beef roasting joints. They're full on flavour, but at half the price. You'll find that's one of our juiciest cuts. Tesco, every little helps.
Medium and large beef roasting joints first £12 per kilogram. Majority of larger stores excludes express on the 24th of December.
This is LBC from Globe.
12:03 is the time. The cabinet minister, I can't remember his name, doesn't matter. They're increasingly interchangeable, aren't they? I guess incompetence is contagious. The cabinet minister said do the minimum, and the problem is household mixing. So what's the minimum household mixing that it's possible to do? Stephen Barclay, what's the minimum household mixing that it's possible to do? What's the minimum number of households? I suppose technically you'd have to say 2, wouldn't you? Minimum mixing. What's the least amount? Yeah, no. Turning into Vicky Pollard. It's the minimum amount of mixing you can do this Christmas. What is the minimum amount? Well, it would
0.
be mixing with anything.
Minimally.
Minimally. So you do minimally mixing. This makes even less sense than the school story we spent 2 hours goggling at this morning. Doesn't it? Or not? 0345 6060973 is the number you need. Listen, I'm not on my high horse today. I usually give you fair warning when I'm intending to climb onto my high horse. I don't generally take calls from people who believe conspiracy theories or hoaxes. I make the occasional exception to that. So, you know, if your plan to spend Christmas with the world and his wife is built upon the fact that there's no such thing as coronavirus. It's all been invented by Bill Gates because he's so fascinated by the contents of your mind that he wants to inject you with a secret microchip. Then I wouldn't go so far as to say you're listening to the wrong radio program, but you're certainly never going to get onto it. But if you do, well, that's the problem now, isn't it? Is that as I describe myself not being on my high horse, I find one of my feet is already in the stirrups, because there is no rational basis for this 5-day holiday, for this 5-day relaxation, this 5-day hiatus. And most obviously, the threat of coronavirus will be the same on the 22nd of December when you're not allowed to mix households, as it will on the 23rd when you are allowed to mix households. So the more I think about this, the more ridiculous it becomes. And then, of course, you factor in the reason why we focus on it today, which is that a joint editorial by the Health Service Journal and the British Medical Journal is calling for to call the whole thing off. No mixing at all. And it's so obvious.
Oh dear.
It's so obvious. The cases in London, and I'm not obsessed with London, I just happen to live here, but the cases in London went up during the second half of lockdown. So what do they think is going to happen at Christmas when people start piling round to each other's and, you know, blowing their kazoos? I just don't get it. Do you? 0345 6060973 is the number you need. I guess when I say I'm not on my high horse, what I mean is I don't want to tear a strip off you if you are still planning to mix at Christmas. I mean, the first fella to ring in describing that he's going to has a family member who is not going to be here next year. Terminal cancer is the reason why, and also he's going to do individual testing. Everyone who's going for Christmas is going to do individual testing. I mean, I fully appreciate not everyone can do that. The problem is this. I want to get to the heart of my problem, because I haven't got a problem with what you're doing. I've got a problem with what the government has done to all of us, because even when you don't realise it's happening, the difference between how you feel when you're not allowed to do something and how you feel when you are allowed to do something seems to me to be profound. You are not allowed to do that, okay. My feelings about that thing I'm not allowed to do are here. I feel a bit unhappy about it, but resigned. And it doesn't really matter whether I approve or disapprove, because the way I'm made, I'll do my best to observe the guidance and the rules that are currently in place. All right. So how do you feel about spending Christmas with two other households? Do you see what I mean? It changes depending on whether it's allowed or not allowed. And yet, this is a decision that has been taken by politicians for almost entirely political reasons. What does Chris Whitty think we should do at Christmas? I bet you a tenner he thinks that we should not mix. What does Devi Sridhar, our favourite academic up in Edinburgh, what does she think we should do at Christmas? We shouldn't mix. What does Boris Johnson think we should do? Folks, stilky cheese. Pardon? What? Boris Johnson thinks we should mix together at Christmas? I don't think he'd be able to, even with three households, he wouldn't be able to get all of his own children under the same roof, would he? I don't despair, but I just worry that we've become so inured to it now that it's just getting worse, not better. And the vaccine, everything hinges on the vaccine, and there are reports that they're muffing that up already as well, with no clue whatsoever how many people have been vaccinated. And even I get bored of being bored, if you see what I mean. I don't think we can talk about anything else at the moment, because this is a matter of life and death. It's on the horizon, and it would appear that the government, which has already presided over arguably the worst response in the world, certainly, indubitably one of the worst responses in the world, and almost incredibly, we are now back in sixth place that we're in for the number of new cases. It almost defies belief, doesn't it, that we have learned so little from our catastrophic handling of the coronavirus since March, that we're now moving into the second year of dealing with it, and we are still the sixth hardest hit country in terms of new cases. Rishi Sunak, a brief time in the spotlight, we felt warm towards him because actually the furlough scheme looked like a good idea, but the longer it's gone on, the more the grave injustice being visited upon 3 million people who've been left with next to nothing, the bigger that becomes. You could almost excuse that when you thought it'll all be over by July or August. But these poor sots have been hung out to dry on an industrial scale. And now it seems to me that the Christmas thing is going to cause an explosion of infection. And what's that based on? Well, not my politics, certainly not my scientific knowledge. It's based upon my trust in experts. And that leads us back to Downing Street, where, of course, undermining experts, poo-pooing experts, denigrating education and expertise is a crucial building block of Boris Johnson's entire premiership. Michael Gove explicitly called it, didn't he, during the Brexit referendum? Is there even an argument here? Is there anybody who genuinely, because I don't want to bite chunks out of each other, and I'm not on my high horse, it turns out, because there's no horse here. It is just obvious that the 5-day relaxation of Christmas rules is dangerous and or stupid. 0345 60973 is the number you need if you want to just talk to me about this one. Is there any defence at all for the Christmas relaxation? And I stress, this is what I mean about not wanting to have a scrap or not being on my high horse. I liked it when it was first announced. But that's the problem, isn't it? Politicians are...
7th of December, but I think from my opinion that's going to sort of water down. You know, people are probably going to start from the other side of the weekend, maybe sort of...
But because, I mean, weirdly, the madness of the policy, it makes it worse than it even needs to be. Because how do you explain to someone, especially if they've had a skinful, why they can do on the 27th something that they can't do on the 28th?
Yeah, I'm in complete agreement with you, and I think you look at it, and if the rules are there, and you just look at it objectively, I think people do feel an obligation and some responsibility to try and stick to those. Because as soon as you sort of put something else out there and people can think, well, you know, from the 23rd to the 27th we can mix, you know, we can do these things. I think, you know, as I've been saying feel that they're able to do that. And I don't blame people necessarily
So
for
what?
doing that.
Then we move into, because I mean you're a medic, so I mean you say you're agreeing with me. I follow people like you on these sort of issues,
Yeah.
and all the way up to the chief medical officer, who I can't off the top remember what he has said about this, but it'd be absolutely critical if privately he's all in favour of mixing gaily throughout the festive period. So the politics of it then becomes